All right, future IAS officers, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a topic that's not only a major global health concern, but also a potential hot-button issue in your upcoming UPSC exams. The resurgence of polio. You heard that right. Polio, a disease we thought was on the verge of eradication, is making an unwelcome comeback.
Yeah, it's a stark reminder that progress in public health is never guaranteed. The World Health Organization is reporting cases popping up in surprising places, including several European countries. This isn't just a problem for developing nations, it's a global challenge that demands our attention.
And what's particularly alarming is that we're seeing this resurgence even in countries with robust healthcare systems. Our sources indicate that in 2024 alone, Pakistan reported a staggering 62 cases of wild poliovirus type 1. Plus, environmental samples containing poliovirus have been detected in cities like Barcelona, Warsaw, and even Cologne. What does this tell us?
It suggests that even in developed nations, there are pockets of vulnerability. This is likely due to a combination of factors including unvaccinated or undervaccinated individuals and the ease of global travel. Remember, diseases don't respect borders.
That's a crucial point for anyone studying global health, especially for the UPSC exams. The interconnectedness of the world means that a health crisis in one region can quickly become a global concern. Now we've got some groundbreaking new research here that really throws a wrench into our understanding of polio transmission. It seems it might not be solely through contaminated food and water, as previously thought.
That's right. The traditional understanding was that polio transmission occurred primarily through the fecal-oral route. However, this new research suggests the possibility of respiratory transmission. This complicates our understanding of how the virus spreads and could have significant implications for containment strategies.
This is where things get interesting and potentially tricky for our UPSC aspirants. This resurgence isn't happening in a vacuum. It's directly tied to several key factors that are crucial for understanding global health and development. We're talking about immunization gaps, particularly in conflict zones, and a major shift in the global vaccine strategy a few years back.
Let's start with the immunization gaps. One of our sources highlights a truly alarming statistic. In active conflict zones in Sudan, routine immunization coverage has plummeted from a solid 85% to a mere 30%. That's a drastic drop, and it creates a perfect storm for outbreaks not just for polio, but for a host of other preventable diseases.
It's a tragic illustration of how conflict and instability directly undermine public health initiatives. And as future policymakers, you need to understand this complex interplay between political instability, healthcare access, and disease outbreaks. It's a potential goldmine for a mains essay question.
Absolutely. And this issue of immunization gaps is further compounded by the shift in global polio vaccine strategy that happened in 2016. The World Health Organization orchestrated a switch from the trivalent oral polio vaccine, or TOPV, to the bivalent OPV known as BOPV.
This OPV switch seems like a big deal. Can you walk us through why this change was made and what complications it might have introduced? This feels like prime territory for both prelims and mains questions.
You're spot on. The trivalent OPV targeted all three types of wild poliovirus, types 1, 2, and 3. However, type 2 wild poliovirus was actually eradicated globally back in 1999. So the continued use of TOPV, which contained a weakened type 2 virus, was actually found to be contributing to outbreaks of something called vaccine-derived poliovirus type 2.
Wait, hold on. So the vaccine itself was causing cases of polio. That sounds counterintuitive.
It's not that the vaccine itself was unsafe, but in extremely rare cases, the weakened type 2 virus in the vaccine could mutate and regain its ability to cause paralysis. This is known as vaccine-derived poliovirus, or VDPV.
I see. So by switching to the bivalent OPV, which only targets types 1 and 3, the goal was to eliminate the risk of vaccine-derived type 2 polio. Problem solved, right?
Well, not entirely. While the switch has significantly reduced the incidence of VDPV type 2, it's important to understand that the oral polio vaccine, whether trivalent or bivalent, still carries a very small risk of causing VDPV. And that brings us to the two main types of polio vaccines: the inactivated polio vaccine, or IPV, and the oral polio vaccine, or OPV, which we've been discussing.
All right, listeners, get those notepads ready because this is where we dive into the nitty-gritty of these vaccines. Crucial knowledge for anyone aiming for that coveted IAS rank.
Let's break down these two vaccines, starting with IPV. It contains inactivated or killed poliovirus, meaning it cannot cause polio. This makes it incredibly safe even for individuals with weakened immune systems.
So on the safety front, IPV sounds like a clear winner. But you mentioned earlier that it's more expensive and requires multiple doses. What are the other trade-offs?
That's right. IPV is more expensive to produce and administer compared to OPV. It also requires multiple doses to achieve optimal protection. But the real catch with IPV is that while it offers excellent protection against paralysis, it doesn't stimulate a strong immune response in the mucous membranes, particularly in the intestines.
So someone vaccinated with IPV might still be able to contract and carry the virus even if they don't show any symptoms?
Precisely. They could become silent carriers and potentially spread the virus unknowingly. This is a critical point to remember when comparing the two vaccines.
Okay, that makes sense. Now let's shift our focus to the oral polio vaccine, or OPV. It's cheaper, easier to administer, and we've already talked about the bivalent and trivalent forms. Remind us, why is it considered so effective, especially in resource-limited settings?
OPV uses a weakened form of the live virus which replicates in the intestine and triggers a robust immune response. This not only protects against paralysis, it also provides strong immunity in the gut, significantly reducing the chance of transmission. Think of it like this IPV is like a security guard protecting the main entrance of a building, preventing the virus from entering. But OPV is like having guards stationed at all entrances and exits, making it much harder for the virus to spread.
That's a great analogy. It really helps to visualize how these vaccines work differently. But as we discussed earlier, OPV carries a very small risk of causing vaccine-derived polio. This poses a real dilemma for policymakers, doesn't it?
Absolutely. This is precisely the kind of ethical and logistical challenge that you as future IAS officers might face. How do you balance the benefits of OPV's ease of administration and cost-effectiveness against the risk, however small, of vaccine-derived polio? Especially in areas with limited healthcare infrastructure, this decision becomes even more complex.
It sounds like a classic UPSC Mains essay question waiting to happen. But before we delve deeper into the policy implications, let's make sure our listeners have a solid grasp of polio itself. Could you give us a concise definition highlighting the key points that are most relevant for the exams?
Polio, or poliomyelitis, is a highly contagious viral disease that primarily affects children under 5. It spreads through contaminated food and water or through contact with an infected person's feces. The virus invades the nervous system and can lead to paralysis in some cases.
So it's a disease that disproportionately impacts young children and can have devastating lifelong consequences. You mentioned earlier that there are different types of wild poliovirus. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, there are 3 distinct wild poliovirus strains, type 1, type 2, and type 3. Type 2 has been eradicated globally, but types 1 and 3 are still circulating in some parts of the world. This is why we have different types of polio vaccines, each designed to target specific strains.
Okay, so we've got IPV and OPV. And within those categories, there are different variations depending on which poliovirus types they target. Our research mentions trivalent OPV, bivalent OPV, and even monovalent OPVs. Can you break these down for us? Certainly. The trivalent OPV, or TOPV, contained weakened forms of all 3 poliovirus types and was the mainstay of global polio eradication efforts for many years. However, as we discussed, the risk of vaccine-derived type 2 polio led to its discontinuation in 2016. This was the OPV switch we talked about earlier. Right, the OPV switch. That's an important term to remember for the exams. What about the bivalent OPV? The bivalent OPV, or BOPV, contains only types 1 and 3 of the weakened poliovirus. It replaced TOPV as the primary oral vaccine used in routine immunization and mass vaccination campaigns.
And then we have the monovalent OPVs. What's their role in all of this?
Monovalent OPVs are designed to target only one specific type of poliovirus. For example, MOPV1 targets only type 1, while MOPV3 targets only type 3. These are sometimes used in specific situations, like during outbreak response, where a targeted approach is crucial. So to recap, we have IPV, which is very safe but requires multiple doses, and OPV, which comes in various forms depending on which poliovirus types it targets. And globally, the strategy has shifted from TOPV to BOPV to minimize the risk of vaccine-derived polio.
You've got it. Understanding these nuances is crucial for anyone studying global health, and especially for those preparing for the UPSC exams. Now let's talk about the global initiatives aimed at eradicating polio. This is a topic that could easily come up in both the mains and prelims.
Absolutely. India, in particular, has made remarkable progress in its fight against polio. One initiative that UPSC aspirants should be familiar with is the Pulse Polio program. Millions of children under 5 received oral polio vaccine drops on designated days during these mass immunization campaigns. I remember those days. There was such a strong sense of collective effort.
What's remarkable about the Pulse Polio program is its impact. India hasn't reported a case of wild polio since 2011, which is a testament to the success of this initiative. It's a classic example of how targeted public health interventions can yield significant results, something you might be asked to analyze in the mains exam.
That's a fantastic point. And it highlights the importance of studying successful public health campaigns, not just the ongoing challenges. What about other initiatives in India that are relevant for the UPSC exams?
Another important one is the Intensified Mission Indradhanush 2.0. It aims to reach every child who has missed out on routine immunizations, including the polio vaccine. Both the Pulse Polio program and the Intensified Mission Indradhanush demonstrate India's commitment to achieving high immunization coverage, a crucial aspect of public health policy in India. This is highly relevant for the mains exam, where you might be asked to analyze the strengths and weaknesses of India's healthcare system.
So we got India's domestic efforts covered. What about global initiatives?
On the global front, the major player is the Global Polio Eradication Initiative, or GPEI. This public-private partnership is spearheaded by the World Health Organization, Rotary International, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and UNICEF. They've made tremendous progress, but as we're seeing with this recent resurgence, the fight is far from over.
The GPEI has undoubtedly been instrumental in coordinating global efforts, but they face significant challenges, right? I imagine funding is a major concern.
Funding is a constant battle for GPEI. As a future policymaker, you need to understand how these initiatives are financed and the impact of funding cuts on eradication efforts. This is a real-world example of how political decisions and budget allocations can directly impact global health outcomes.
This raises the question of whether there are any lessons we can learn from past eradication efforts. Smallpox, for instance, was eradicated globally in 1980. Are there any strategies or approaches that we could apply to polio eradication?
That's a fascinating question, and one that global health experts are grappling with right now. Smallpox eradication was a monumental achievement, but polio presents unique challenges. One key difference is the existence of vaccine-derived polio, which we discussed earlier. This adds a layer of complexity that smallpox eradication didn't have to contend with.
That's a crucial point. So even if we achieve high immunization coverage with OPV, there's still that lingering risk of the vaccine itself causing cases. Like a double-edged sword.
Exactly. And then there's the issue of surveillance. Smallpox had very clear symptoms, making it easier to track and contain outbreaks. Polio, on the other hand, can present asymptomatically, meaning people can spread the virus without knowing they're infected. This makes surveillance and contact tracing much more challenging.
Those are some critical differences, and they highlight the need for constantly adapting our strategies. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to eradication.
Absolutely. And let's not forget the role of public awareness and community engagement. Eradication efforts rely heavily on people's willingness to get vaccinated and to report suspected cases. Addressing vaccine hesitancy and building trust in healthcare systems are crucial components of any successful eradication campaign.
That's a point that often gets overlooked, but it's absolutely essential. You can have the best vaccines and the most well-funded initiatives, but if people aren't on board, eradication becomes nearly impossible.
Precisely. It's a multifaceted challenge that requires a holistic approach, taking into account scientific, logistical, social, and political factors. And this is where you, as future IAS officers, come in. You'll be the ones making decisions and implementing policies that impact public health. Understanding these nuances is crucial for effective leadership.
So this deep dive into polio and its resurgence is not just about memorizing facts for the UPSC exams. It's about understanding the complex web of factors that contribute to global health challenges and being able to analyze them critically.
Couldn't have said it better myself. This episode has touched on themes of immunization strategies, the impact of conflict on healthcare, global health governance, and the science behind different vaccine types. It's all interconnected and highly relevant for both the mains and prelims exams.
We've covered a lot of ground today, and I hope our listeners are feeling a bit more confident about tackling polio-related questions in the UPSC exams. But beyond the exams, this discussion has broader implications. It's about being informed citizens who understand the challenges facing our world and who can contribute to solutions.
Well said. The fight against polio is a reminder that global health is everyone's responsibility. We need engaged citizens, informed policymakers, and dedicated healthcare professionals working together to achieve a healthier future for all.
And that's the perfect note to end on. If you found this deep dive helpful, don't forget to subscribe and like our podcast. We'll be back soon with more explorations of topics that are both fascinating and relevant for your journey toward becoming an IAS officer. Until then, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep striving for that dream.